Hello everybody and welcome back to DJ Tutorials. This is part 5 of the basic geometric compositions for beginners, intermediate, advanced, all that kind of stuff. Back to basics. If you haven't seen my previous parts, please go back and look at especially the UV unwrapping and make sure that you have that done before moving on because that's going to make what we do next a lot easier. So what we're going to do here is we are going to start to add more complicated materials to um, our objects. And how we're going to be doing that is using a free set of textures. And what we'll do is, because I really like to promote the AMD stuff, we're actually going to go to the Radeon Prorender website. Oops, Radeon Prorender. And we're going to go in here and we're actually going to scroll down and we're going to go to the plugins here, AMD Radeon plugins, and you're going to click on Learn More for Blender. I'll put the link to all this in the description. And then you're going to scroll down. Actually, it's towards the top here. I always do this. See, it says download now. Takes you to another screen. Go down, and what you want is the material library. Now, I have Windows. If you have Mac OS or whatever, that's fine. And what you want to do is you want to click this. It will download, and when that's done, you'll see it here. You can show that in the folder, and you'll see it right here. You can see I've done this quite a few times because I have a little 4 here. Double click this, and you'll just keep hitting next and install it. Okay. It's safe. Don't worry. I've been using this for a long time, and you get a lot of free materials that you can use for all kinds of stuff. They're not the highest quality ever, but they're something decent. And it's what we're going to be using right now for this particular project that we're doing because we're going to keep it nice and simple. And there are some really nice, simple textures that are in this pack. And it's not really easy to get to, so I'll kind of show you how to get to it in a minute when we start actually adding this. So let's go ahead and I'm going to close this down because I already have it installed. And so make sure that you do that. Now, if you do want to use something else, like a different image that you find online, or you go to texturehaven.com or something like that, that's totally fine. Or something that you have because you're more experienced. But for us beginners, just make sure that you have the Radeon Pro material library in there. And I do have a series on the Radeon Prorender render engine, and we will be doing that later. You will, if you're going to be following that part, you're going to have to download the actual engine and the materials library anyway, just for that part. But anyway, let's actually get to the meat of this tutorial. So what we're going to do is we're going to start adding some textures to our objects here. So if I go over here and I go to the, actually let's just go to the shading tab here. And we're going to start with our cube, just like we did before. And I'm going to go a little bit faster here. I'm not going to explain every single keystroke. Again, it's over here on the left, along with the keyboard. Let me actually move the keystrokes here. And let's move it up a little bit so you can see that. Okay, and let's go into the local mode here. And let's actually delete this from our last one, which showed the UV grid. Let's actually delete that. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a texture. So if I hit Shift A, texture, to add in here, Shift A, go to texture, image texture, and make sure that you left click to plop it down. We're going to open up a texture, but first, before we do that, I need to show you where this stuff is housed. So where you actually are going to find this, and this is on Windows. For Mac OS, it'll be different in Linux. If you're using Linux, I'm just not going to be able to help you that much. And Mac, I'm not sure where they're going to house it on Mac. You could probably do a search for it, and I'm sure you can find it. But for a Windows user, where it's located is if we go into onto this PC, go into the C drive. What you want to do is go up to View and turn on the View Hidden Items. And what they do is they store it in this folder here. So if you go into the program data, you'll find a Radeon Prorender folder. Double click in there and you'll see Materials Library, and double click inside of there and you'll see a Maps folder. That is where all of the image maps are being held as of right now. So if we select on this path here and hit Control C a couple times to make sure that it's actually, copying, go back into Blender, click the Open button, and then in the top right here, click in here and hit Control V, Enter, and this is where you'll see a bunch of images. And what you'll want to do, I've already done it here, you'll want to hit this little plus button to save a favorites folder. So you hit the plus and you can save that to here, so you can always go here. This is where all your recent stuff is that you've clicked on. Over here you want to hit that plus so that you can save that location. And then we're going to filter up here on the top right. We're actually going to change this to thumbnails. We're not going to filter it, we're just going to do thumbnails. And you can see that we can get a preview of everything that's in here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to find something that we kind of like, not too stark contrasty like this right here with the transparency thing. We want to find something that looks kind of decent with a just black and white image. And you don't really want the stone thing or anything like that. What we want is, let's pick this one here just for fun. This metal scratched 001.png. So let's double click that, and nothing really has happened yet because we have not plugged this into anything. If we take this and we plug it into the base color, you can see that it's now changed the coloring of our object. And really, that's not what we want to do for this. What we actually want to do is we want to use this to control our roughness. That's what we're going to do with this. So let's left click on this and take that pipe and remove it. And if we take this, left click and drag and put it into the roughness, and we take a look at this, you can see that it is changing the way that light is reflecting off our object. It's actually using the black and white data to project a roughness map onto our object to say what's rough and what's shiny, or smooth, I guess. So if we take this and we deselect it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how this works a little bit more. If I pull this all the way over to 0, this is basically using like a binary, okay? And 0 is equivalent to black. Kind of if we go in here and we pulled this all the way down, like the value all the way down to 0, see that's black, and to the right it's 1, which is all the way white. Let's put this back to what it was, so I'm just going to Control Z just to set that back at 0.7. What this is, it's exactly the same. 0 means that there's 0 roughness, and 1 means that there's full roughness. And it means white, 1, and 0 is black for 0, or 0 is black. And if we take this right here and we pipe this into the base color again, you can see that there is some darker values, some blacks, and there's some white values. Now don't worry about the pixelation. Remember what I said, these are not the highest quality, but there's a lot of them, and for beginners this will work completely fine for what I'm going to show you. We can see that if we take this again and we left click and drag this into the roughness, it's using that data to set rough and non-rough areas of our object. Now, I actually want to control this more, and I'm all about control inside of this program. There's a lot of things you can do. So we're going to add a node so that we can control how black and how white we're actually mapping this image to. So if I hit Shift A and I add a converter, so go down to converter here and go up to color ramp, left click that, and just, you can like move it around. And if you left click here, you can slide it right here in between this pipe and it will highlight white, release, and now nothing has happened, but the color ramp is now going to be controlling um, the black and white values from this. And one thing before we actually change this part is we're going to change this right here, this color space. And if I take this color and I just plop that right back into the base color, I'll show you what this does, and hopefully it's visible here. If we take this and we change the color space from sRGB, we want to go down to non-color. And what that does is it actually kind of like makes this a little bit more refined, I guess you could say. It just works better um, for black and white values when you're trying to use that to map to another object. So non-color, I think, works pretty well. Sometimes I've seen a couple issues happen. I'm not really sure to explain. It's kind of hard to explain, but for right now, just change that to non-color. And then for this color ramp, let's actually pipe that. So left click this and pipe that into the base color here so we can see what we're actually doing as we move this. Now, just a note, there is an add-on called Node Wrangler that makes some of this easier to see, but I'm going to do this without the add-on so that you can really understand before you start adding a bunch of add-ons what is happening inside of the node editor. If we left click and drag this over to the right, you'll see it's getting darker. And if we left click and pull that back and we take the white and we pull it over to the left, you'll see that it gets whiter. And if I take this and I move that away from the base color, and if we look at the object here and I move the black over to the right, you'll see that it gets more shiny. And if we take the white and we move it to the left, you'll see that it gets more rough. Okay. Now, one thing I'll actually say now that I'm thinking about this with the non-color, really that only works with full-on black and white. And since what we're using um, probably isn't just a black and white channel thing, let's just change this back to sRGB for now. So again, if we pull this over, you can see that it gets more or less rough, and you can start to see like lines form. Let's put this back into the base color so you can see those white bits there are the rough parts. And if I pull this over, and I pull this back, you can kind of play with that. Now, because this doesn't really look that great, it's really more pixelated than I'd like, we're going to be adding some mapping nodes to help us control, and again, I'm saying that a lot because that's really what I want to sort of drive home, is that this is all about controlling your texture mapping here. We're going to be adding something into this right here. And what we need in order to control how many times this is tiled or mapped to this surface, we need to add two nodes here. You're going to hit Shift A, you're going to go to Input, and you're going to go to Texture Coordinate, which will bring up this node here. And then you're going to hit Shift A, and you're going to go to Vector, and you're going to go to Mapping. So this is basically saying use this information, which we're going to be using our UV that we created when we unwrapped our cube. We're going to be using the UV to map to this vector here. You're going to left click and drag this into this input. And so you're saying use the UV information that you made in our last tutorial and use that to map information into our image map here. And when I did that, nothing happened yet. But if you take the scale and we change this, you'll see that it actually does do something different. So if I take the scale here and I left click and drag, you can see that now it's tiling more times across our surface. And the same thing with the Y and the Z, nothing's really happening because that's just not how this one's mapping, because there's a reason we're doing UV unwrapping or the UV texture coordinates, and that's why Z, nothing's happening. But anyway, that doesn't really matter. But what we want to do is we want to increase the amount of times that this is scaled up so that the texture looks nicer. If we set this all back to 1 by left clicking here, hitting 1, tab 1, tab 1, enter. It's a low res image, and that's why you see this pixelation. But if we take that, and this is a really fun thing, if you left click here and you drag down, you can actually change all of these at the same time, and we put a 3 in here. You can see that it's just now duplicated that 3 times. It's basically taking the image map that we have, which is seamless, and it's projecting it 3 times here. And the higher the scale, the more times it's duplicated. The lower the scale, so if I left click drag down and hit a 0.5 here, you can see the less times it's duplicated. So let's go ahead, left click drag down, and let's put a 3 back in there because that looks all right. And we're going to be about this far away, so it should be fine. Now let's take this out of the base color, and you can see that now our texture looks a lot more realistic. We have it's sort of worn a bit. We have what looks like some cuts in it, and not all of it is completely shiny, and not all of it is completely diffused or rough. It's sort of a mixture between, and it looks a little bit more worn. Now we're not done here. The next thing that we're going to add is we're going to actually add something that's going to make this more realistic. And what that is what's called a layer weight node. And if you ever are in real life, and as you start, really doing things in CGI, you're going to be thinking about this when you're just walking around. Trust me, it's going to happen. Next time you walk by a wall, just observe that as you get further and further towards the edge of it, how much more reflective it gets versus when you're just directly looking straight on at it. And that is because, oh, by the way, if you're confused here, I did not set this back to the studio lighting. I left it on this world lighting here, this outdoor one, which is fine. This is going to work out better for just looking at our materials. And what I'm trying to show you here. In real life, the more something is at an angle, the more reflective it gets. And the more straight on to the object you get, the less reflective it gets. And to mimic that in real life, what we need to do is actually add that into our node setup. It's not automatically going to be put in with this principled BSDF. So what we're going to do is add a layer weight. So Shift A, input, layer weight. You can also do searches if you can't find what I'm doing or what I'm adding. You can click this, start to type in layer, and you'll see right there, there's layer weight. So let's take this facing, this is what we're going to be using, and we're going to pipe that into the base color here, just so we can look at it. And we're going to remove the roughness. We're just going to try and look at this layer weight here. Now, you'll notice that if I am straight on to camera, or if I look at this straight on, it gets dark, and you can kind of see this dot, or yeah, it's kind of like a dot right there in the center. And if I go to an edge, you can see, or if I spin it around, you can see that it changes. Now this is dark and this is white. And what it's doing is basically, however you are angled to this object, it's going to change something about its behavior. If I'm straight on, the dark spot is right there. And if I move it to the side, the more white it gets on this edge here. And if I take this blend and I push it to the right to a 0.9, you'll see that it's more obvious. Here's that circle, and if I move it to the edge, it's white. So what this does is it actually makes it to where we're actually adding something that can alter how, when we look at the object, it changes a black and white value, which is really important for what we're going to do. Remember what I said. If you walk by a wall and you get to this extreme angle, it should be more reflective than if you're looking at it straight on. And remember, black, according to our roughness value here, let me just pipe this into the base color and the roughness again. Remember, black, or the dark values, is equal to reflective, and the white is the rough. So if we're looking, if we take the facing here and we put it back into the base color and we take the roughness out of here, if we're looking at this layer weight, black, if we're going to use this to control our roughness values, black is more reflective and white is more rough. So if we take this from the base color and put it into the roughness, you can see that as we move around, it's actually changing the reflectivity of the object. Black is reflective when we're straight on, and then white at the edge is more rough. This is actually the opposite of what we want, right? Because if we move by the wall, it should get more reflective, not more rough. So what we need to do is add an invert node. So if we hit Shift A, search, invert, enter, it brings up this node here. And you can left click here, or you can just simply drag it into that, in between that pipe. And then you can see that now it's doing exactly what we wanted. If I look at it from the front view and I move to the side, it gets more reflective and vice versa. But that's not enough. We want to add, or, have this effect that we've done here with the layer weight be added to our reflective roughness map here to make it more realistic, right? So what we need to do is add another node here. And I'm actually going to move this color ramp over here. You're going to hit Shift A and you're going to go to Color Mix RGB right here. And we're just going to plop that right there. So what we're going to do now is we're basically going to take this node setup that we did here, and we're going to multiply the value, which will make the blacks, the dark values, be added or multiplied to our, it will be multiplied to the other image. So if you take the color here, pipe it into the bottom. And before we do anything here, I just want to show you what's happening. I'm going to take the color and put it into the base color here and remove the roughness. If we take the mix right here and we go to the right, you'll see that now we're looking at the layer weight, okay? And if we take the factor and move it to the left, we're looking at this right here. So the left is the top and the right is the bottom. But what we want to do is we actually want to multiply the dark values of this one here by the ones that are on the top, the image map here. So we change this to multiply. And if we change the factor, you can see that now we're controlling how much that is actually changing the roughness value here. Okay, so then we can take this color ramp, pipe that into our roughness, remove it from the base color, and now we have a roughness that a roughness map here that when we look at it straight on is more diffused, which is what it should be in real life. And then as it goes towards the angle here, it becomes more and more reflective, just like that. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to use, let's just move this stuff down here. You can left click and drag to move it down. We're actually going to create a specularity map with just this image here. And this is going to be very, very simple. All we're going to do is we're going to take this color ramp, duplicate it. We're going to pipe this into here. Then we're going to take this and we're going to move it into here. Now, if you remember, and I'm just going to remove the roughness for now. If you remember specularity, let's remove this and just refresh. If a specularity is all the way at 1, it's really showing a lot of that reflective light. And then if we put it back to 0, it's not reflecting a lot of light, okay? What we want to do is we want to control the specularity, to make it more realistic, we want to take the specularity and we want it kind of to match what we're doing with our roughness map here. And how we're actually going to do this is we're just going to invert this. Why am I inverting it? Well, if I take this and I put this into the base color, white is equal to the rough areas, right? Black is equal to the shiny areas. If black is shiny and white is rough, a rough area should have less specularity than the shiny. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this color ramp, click this arrow, flip color ramp, and then pipe that into specularity. And if we look at this and we start to actually adjust the black here and pull it over to the left, you can see that it's now removing the specularity based on our image map. And if I take this into the base color, you can kind of see it like that. Now, why do I do this? If we take a look at the roughness, if we pipe this back in and we go more at the edge here, there should be areas that still, the reflectivity should still not be this much. It should still be some sort of control of the specularity, because a rougher area should not reflect as much of this reflected light. So let's take this, pop it into the specularity here, or the specular node, and then you can see that now we have more realness or more realism going on with our material, because we can now control the amount of specularity and the amount of roughness. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this black slider, I'm going to push it up to about here so it's more obvious. Then I'm going to go down here and I'm just going to left click and drag this a little bit. Maybe about there, and pull it back a little bit. Maybe there. So it's just a little bit of added realism, and you can play with this as much as you want and get it exactly right on how you want this to be presented. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to do to add a little bit more, like I said, realism to our object here, or the material, is we're now going to use this image map to create a bump map for our object or for our material. So if we hit Shift A here and we go to Vector Bump right here, you'll see that it makes this node. And what we want to do is we want to take this and pipe that into the height right here. Then take this and pipe it into the normal. And what that does, you can see right there, is it makes the surface bumpy. And this looks really bad, and that's partially the render engine, but also that this is set really, really high. And we're just going to take the strength, and you can left click and slide it down. And let's put it somewhere around 0. That's still a little bit much. Let's do a 0.02. And now you have a bumpy texture as well as your specular, your roughness. And that's going to overall create a much more realistic material for you. And you can play with the strength here. You can play with the specular here. You can even try changing this to non-color. And you can see that it actually does change a lot of how the information is being calculated from your actual image here. The other thing you can do is change the multiply here, increase or decrease that if you want it more or less shiny. And then with your color ramp here, you can make this not so reflective. So let's actually pull that up to about here, maybe. And that I think will be just fine for now. I do actually want to increase the scaling here. So let's actually put this at a 4. and that'll make it a little bit tighter, and we can mess with these a little bit more without it looking so bad up close. And again, you can just kind of play with this stuff until you get it where you want. So I'm going to say that this is okay for now, and we're going to hit / on our numpad and go back here. Now you can basically do the same thing here with all of your other objects, and this is going to be a lot easier the second time we do it because we've created all of these nodes already. We have everything sort of connected here. You can hit these little drop down arrows to hide them. You can also select it and hit H to unhide them. But what we're going to do is we're just going to left click, box select all of these and hit Control C a couple times. Click the sphere over here, down here in the node editor, Control V, and we're just going to pipe all this stuff back in. So the bottom one here is the bump. It goes into the normal right here. The second one here is the roughness right there. And then this top one is going to be the specular. And if we look at that closely, you can see that it's now, if I hit period here to zoom in on it, you can see that it's now mapped a texture onto our object. You can see that it's got some roughness and all that kind of stuff. Oh, by the way, if you can't find anything because it's, you can't see it, you can zoom way out like this to find it and then zoom in on it again, or you can just hit A to make sure everything's selected and then hit period inside of here and it will zoom in on that section. That's going to be it for now. Hopefully you have something similar to this here. Obviously you might have a different sort of composition, but you have a nice sort of background and your main objects with some more advanced textures on them. And we will start doing some lighting in the next tutorial. So make sure to like and subscribe if you are actively following this series and like what you're seeing. And I will see you guys in the next part. Thanks for watching, and if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and make sure that you hit the little bell icon to notify you when new videos are uploaded. And I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.